my program was all set up to be this: Texas battle flag Texas pattern. In fact, there is such a thing as a battle flag Texas pattern, something I came across in the course of my research. And I'll mention a little bit about that, but that's not really what my talk is about today. I was getting ready for this talk about Lone Stars all the time. I've done that talk many times. I thought what would be nice is to give a talk about why flags are so rare or so difficult to achieve. In the Civil War, flags were very precious objects. And of course, they had an emotional attachment. They had a functional attachment. They were used to be able to locate your lines, to be able to see where your regiments were in the field, to be able to, through the smoke and haze of battle, to be able to know where you're supposed to be. So if your unit lost its battle flag, then it was hard to control after that. People were very emotionally attached to flags. Obviously, all the stories about flag captures and veterans after the war worrying and arguing with one another over, was it fair the way my flag was captured, or I captured your flag and you didn't get mine, and fights would always take place when or often take place when Union and Confederate veterans would get together. But what I discovered too was that especially Confederate units had hard times even getting flags. Flags were expensive objects. It's a strange thing, but they were hard to come by in the South. And so I'm going to talk today about why they made flags out of certain things, how hard they were to get, and then we'll talk about the Lone Star on flags as we go along. But if you'll bear with me, I want to let you know some of the original fruits of my research, or some of the fruits of my research that I've come across lately. Now, flags have a great emotional attachment, but as a practical matter, a battle flag was just another piece of essential military equipment, subject to the uncertainties of supply and availability, little different from muskets, ammunition, and even things like shoes. And like weapons, Civil War battle flags were costly and sometimes hard to come by items. The main reason for this expense was that military flags were usually made of silk. And silk was expensive and often rare in 19th century America. You wouldn't think that cloth would be such a rare thing today because it's so easy to come by, but it was an expensive item in those days. But there could be no question that this gossamer cloth made impressive flags, that is silk, for it is the lightest of fabrics and thus could be fashioned into large banners that visually dominated the battlefield. Yet they were light enough to be waved and held aloft as long as the battle lasted by reasonably fit standard bearers, or sometimes a relay of standard bearers. Silk also flew well. Even in a light breeze, these flags billowed impressively, allowing full visualization of painted images. Silk standards were also easy to color by the means of the vegetable dyes used at the time, and took paint well, thus assuring a clear and dramatic canvas for whatever design the flag maker desired. The use of silk flags, however, also presented practical problems in the field. Silk's fragile fibers are intensely vulnerable to damage from water and sunlight, both of which cause rapid breakdown of the cloth's microfibers. Thus, silk battle flags were kept rolled up in oilcloth cases while on campaign, only to be unfurled on the battlefield and on various formal occasions. The delicate lightness of the silk, the very quality that made battle flags visually dramatic, rendered them supremely vulnerable to every sort of damage. Rips caused by careless handling, burn holes from campfire embers and musketry sparks, not to mention damage from the myriad ravenous insects that accompanied and intercepted armies on the march. Silk battle flags, indeed battle flags of almost any material as it turned out, rarely lasted more than a year of hard campaigning. Thus, both Civil War armies required a constant supply of new flags, and if tradition was to be honored, a reliable and abundant supply of silk. Northern armies had little trouble providing the appropriate colors to their troops. U.S. Army quartermasters were fortunate to possess sufficient silk to supply fine battle flags to all Union armies and still have large quantities left over. Confederate soldiers favored silk for battle flags just as their northern counterparts. But in the South, the scarcity and expense of silk fabric forced flag makers to experiment with whatever cloth was on hand. Yet even so, rebel flags often remained hard to come by and difficult to replace, since any cloth sturdy enough to make a flag and still light enough for a man to hoist in battle was scarce in most parts of the South. For the Confederacy, supplying flags to their armies, as with so many other items, was a matter of expediency and improvisation, often relying on the imaginativeness of local communities, such as rather than organized channels of supply. Now, Confederate commanders found that one way to ease the shortage of silk was to require less of it. They adopted the Napoleonic practice that each regiment and battalion would fly only one moderate-sized battle flag. Union troops and Union regiments, on the other hand, followed the long-held U.S. Army practice of hoisting two huge silk flags. Now, the silk flag tradition comes from the British Army. During the Revolutionary War, American troops came in contact with this. And each British infantry regiment carried two flags into battle. One was a king's color, which is the Union Jack. The Union Jack there, or a preliminary version of the Union Jack, right here. And the other is a regimental color that is painted with the number of the regiment and a regimental badge. This shows you the size of these things. They're quite large. They're 6 feet by 6 feet. 6 feet by 6 feet 6 inches. So they're quite large. They have to be made of silk because of the weight problem. They have long 8-foot poles that they're hoisted on. And in the North, they adopted the same procedure. After the Revolutionary War and on through the 19th century, U.S. Army colors consisted of two different flags of the same size the British colors were. The national colors with the unit designation on them, and then a regimental flag that had the national arms of the United States. So the two flag pattern for Union flags was this way. Now notice this is the flag of the 24th Infantry Regiment. This is a post-war flag actually that we used in the Texas Flags exhibition, because the federal government had no trouble producing and distributing these expensive battle flags. Quartermasters issued colors to Union regiments just like any other piece of equipment. Each flag was standardized and mass-produced. The only obvious difference between them was the number of the regiment, which was added only after the flag had been issued. Union battle flags like cannon, muskets, and uniforms usually were manufactured by contractors in cities such as Boston, New York, Chicago, and Buffalo. At war's end, there were still hundreds of blank flags stored in warehouses waiting to be issued. So many of them remained that Army quartermasters would continue to distribute these surplus flags to U.S. Army regiments until well into the 1880s. So you had warehouses full of Civil War flags. There was such an abundance in the North. And this is the 24th Infantry Regiment, which was one of the African American regiments that served on the Texas frontier. But the flags, of course, are identical to most of the other flags issued by the U.S. Army. Now, without the luxury of Union resources, Confederate commanders had to use great ingenuity to supply even one flag to a regiment. Yet the flags they provided were rarely uniform in size and pattern, never achieving the standardization characteristic of Union forces. Southern generals and political leaders would have preferred the battle flags produced could be produced with uniformity and efficiency, but the South, with its relative poverty, fierce individualism, and regional pride, made this a difficult proposition. To supply battle flags to the armies in the field proved a considerable challenge and required a variety of sources, from private citizens, government jobbers, and contractors when available, and from their own ingenuity and resources to find these crucial pieces of military paraphernalia. Only in the Army of Northern Virginia was any rebel force consistently able to achieve the goal of outfitting its component regiments with uniform colors. The Confederate battle flags thus were characterized by a diversity of designs and fabrics, as they adopted an ever-changing and evolving variety of symbols and made do with whatever cloth was available. variety was especially notable in Texas Confederate units. Because Lone Star soldiers served in nearly every Southern Army fighting from Arizona to Maryland, they flew more types of battle flags than the troops of any other state. And of course, Texans always took pride in their own special symbol. Wherever they fought and whenever they could, Texans usually added a representation of the Lone Star in some way to their flags. And we'll show some examples of that in just a second. Usually, the very first battle flags were, in fact, homemade flags that were presented to companies and regiments by the hometown folk, usually the women of the community. Sewing in traditional groups and circles, wives and mothers sacrificed their wedding and ball dresses and precious hoarded silk and cotton fabric to construct the rustic colors. And in scenes repeated in Texas throughout the spring and summer of 1861, local belles presented battle flags to their fathers, brothers, and sons in public ceremonies held on town squares and in front of courthouses. Usually, these company and regimental flags combined a variation of the new Confederate national flag, the Stars and Bars, with the Lone Star flag of Texas. The volunteers eventually made their way to the far-flung forces of the South, where they would trade their homemade flags for those displaying whatever design was current in the armies that they joined. But everywhere Texans served, if at all possible, they added the Lone Star to their flags, quote, to remind them of home. Some versions, some designs of these early flags that were homemade, Texas flags. And of course, notice the Lone Star in all of these. This is a pattern that I discovered runs through Texas in the early days of the war. This is the Texas flag, the de facto flag of secession, which is the Texas flag flown over the Capitol from about February 1861 until the late spring, sometime in June. It is the Lone Star of Texas, surrounded by the the stars of the sister states of the Confederacy, and we find this. We'll find this pattern in various flags of companies and regiments in the early days of the war, before the symbols had been sort of set in stone. Here's another version of the secession flag used in combination with the first national pattern, the Stars and Bars. This is a first national pattern again, with a Lone Star set in it, very typical of the flags flown by early Texas units. It's a beautiful image, or a beautiful flag of silk, and of course this is blue. Things have faded on these flags. These vegetable dyes didn't last long, and the blues are especially vulnerable. Another flag, this one's at Camp Maberry now, has some nice embroidery in it. This is unusual. It has a Texas star, and then it has embroidered the names of the other, or abbreviations for the names of the other states that seceded. And interestingly enough, these 4 red stars represent the 4 nations of the Indian Territory, the 4 Indian nations who were allied with the Confederacy at that particular time. Now, we were happy enough, someone provided some reproductions of flags. This is the 20th Texas Regiment, a very early flag. The 20th Texas was originally Nichols' regiment, a 6-month volunteer unit out of Galveston. And it was a very expensive flag. This flag was not homemade. It has no Lone Star. It was made by a wallpaper company in Galveston, so it's one of the rare commercial flags. Its twin is still in Galveston in the, what is the Artillery Club? Is that what that is? Have you seen the flag yet? Yeah. Mm-hmm. This flag, though, had some sort of painting in the center, which is long lost, so we don't know what it is. Beautiful flag. It had been recycled. If you look closely, you can see that over 20, for the 20th Regiment, 20th Infantry Regiment, Nichols has been crossed out up there, so it was such a valuable flag, they decided to recycle it. Now, particularly well known, of course, were the Texans that served in Virginia and would form Hood's Brigade, and the story of their flags provides volumes of interesting stuff, but just a few things at least. The commanders of troops in Virginia had agonized originally over what design to use for battle flags. Some had wanted to continue to use the Stars and Stripes. This is the Confederate Army we're talking about, reasoning that the Southern Republic had as much right to the revered banner as the Northern one. This notion was, of course, quickly discarded, and the idea of having two flags on two different armies, or two armies flying the same flag, was discarded. But that actually happened, though, in the Mexican Revolution. You have in the Mexican Revolution the same flag on both sides. So there are not precedents, but there are times when that has happened. The notion, of course, was quickly discarded. In Richmond that summer of 1861, originally they decided, let's use state flags. So many of the first battalions and regiments flew state flags. Interestingly enough, there weren't any state flags before secession, very few. There were some militia flags, like from the state of Georgia. Texas had their Texian Flag, but most of them had to come up with new state flags. And you've seen the flag of North Carolina, which looks just like a flipped version of the Texas flag, clearly a knockoff of our flag, which I tell my North Carolina friends, and it has a very small kind of weenie star on it too. Now, here's a little reproduction of this. This is a very large flag. It's like 6 by 4 feet, something like that. There's not much left of it. This flag used to hang in the Capitol, in the Senate chamber, right next to the San Jacinto flag. But it pretty much, of course, that wouldn't happen today. But here's a model of it. Actually, there were other battle honors here. This one said in green said Ethan's Landing up here, and down here said Malvern Hill. Ethan's Landing is a very minor skirmish, was a very minor skirmish in the Peninsula Campaign. And the first Texas, as far as I can find, took no part in Malvern Hill, and yet they had a battle honor for that particular thing. Now, so many battle flags, this was impractical that they continue to use state flags. So then they tried the stars and bars. This is a flag of the 5th Texas that I was able to identify for the first time. It's, of course, a stars and bars with a little lone star on it. Now, this flag comes from a tailor in Richmond. The soldiers were roaming around town trying to find a flag for their regiment, and they found a tailor who made this particular flag for them. I think this is in the archives collection now. Very nice flag. They carried this through the Peninsula Campaign and beyond. Yeah, let's go to that. There was only one problem, or there were several problems with this. During the course of the battle fought in Manassas, Virginia, the stars and bars pattern proved to possess a fatal flaw as a battle flag. On a calm day and at a distance, the stars and bars looked just like the stars and stripes. So as a result of the confusion, soldiers sometimes fired on their own troops and troop columns were misidentified. To correct the problem, General Joseph Johnston, now commanding what would be known as the Army of Northern Virginia, acting on the recommendations of General P.T.G. Beauregard, ordered a new flag to be adopted, a flag to be used only on the field of battle, as he said. The design he selected became known as the Army of Northern Virginia battle flag, whose Southern Cross design and its many variations, more than anything else, came to symbolize the Confederacy. They had talked about making this flag the flag first before the stars and bars, but somebody made the wisecrack remark about it looking like a pair of suspenders, so they decided to go with the stars and bars, which looked more like the stars and stripes. Nevertheless, this became the great flag. Now, here's a prototype version of it. This is one of the versions which they made. There were 4 of these which they sent to be copied for the new flag. Now, interestingly enough, to save on fabric, the flag would be square rather than rectangular. Have you ever wondered why the battle flag is square? Because they didn't have enough fabric is why. And it was also much smaller. It's only 48 inches by 48 inches, smaller than northern flags. General Johnston ordered his regiments his quartermasters to provide flags to his regiments, and to fulfill these orders, government agents purchased the entire silk supply of Richmond. The resulting flags, assembled by local seamstresses, were presented to the Army on December 1861, but the new flags were far from uniform in appearance. Each was 48 inches square or thereabouts, and displayed 12 stars in either gold or white. Some had gold or yellow fringes, while others were bound in 2-inch yellow silk borders. The scarlet of the field actually varied in shade from orangey red to rose to even pink. So they had pink battle flags at one time. The supply of silk, however, proved inadequate to make enough flags for the entire Army, and many units, like the 1st and 5th Texas Regiments, began the 1862 Peninsula campaigns still flying their state flags or their stars and bars. The 5th Texas did better. This is one of our best flags. This is a beautiful silk version of the Army of Northern Virginia flag provided by the Wigfall family, Senator Lewis T. Wigfall, with this big, nice silk lone star in the middle of it. Beautiful flag, pretty much typical of a Texas version of one of these. There was probably a fifth Texas version that's been lost to this as well. Supposedly, Mrs. Wigfall and her daughter Lula sacrificed their dresses to provide this flag, and then this Texas flag also, which is from the Wigfall family, but they would have had to have been very large women for this to have happened, so maybe the stars came from this. Now, with the silk supply exhausted, the Richmond authorities tried next a wool cotton blend of fabric that's normally used for making work clothes. The 1st Texas Regiment received an issue of this so-called cotton issue, which looks like this. It's pretty, they never really warmed to this flag particularly. It doesn't fly very well. But that and the 1st Texas flag were carried at the Battle of Antietam, and in fact were both lost in the cornfield when the 8 Texans were gunned down trying to save those. Now, clearly the silk supply was not going to be adequate to make flags for the Army of Northern Virginia. So what happened next is that in the spring of 1862, there was a solution to the problem of flags, flag materials that they had on hand all the time, that the Confederacy had not taken advantage of, or at least the Army of Northern Virginia. In 1861, the Norfolk Navy Yards had fallen to Confederate forces, and there they found a vast quantity of the finest English bunting, which the U.S. Navy intended to use to make its flags for the foreseeable future. Silk is a wholly unsuitable material for naval flags and ensigns. The conditions of sea service, salt water, intense sun, and fierce gales would have destroyed the toughest silk ensigns in short order. Instead, the Navy employed flags woven from the tough wool of merino sheep, a breed that thrived in the Midlands of Great Britain. English bunting was light, water-resistant, and tough, a perfect material for flags flown at sea. Although it was heavier than silk and did not fly well, bunting endured the rigors of campaigning much better, and after the silk ran out and the cotton blend proved unsatisfactory, the bunting was tried and became the fabric of choice. Thus, the Army of Northern Virginia secured sufficient cloth to make flags for the rest of the war. By the spring of 1862, Richmond was turning out bunting flags at an impressive rate, but without an effective industrial infrastructure, the work of actually producing the flags remained the task of local women. Craftsmen, often slaves at the Richmond Clothing Depot, cut out the bunting according to standard patterns and distributed the flag kits to the local women to sew at home. And all these workers supplied 6 successive issues of battle flags made from this tough and resilient material. Now, this is the classic Army of Northern Virginia battle flag right here. And this is one of the flags of Hood's Brigade, actually. The Texans of Hood's Brigade still favored flags with lone stars and sometimes resisted carrying the new official issues, often in defiance of strict Army regulations. But marching and fighting was hard on battle flags, and most needed to be replaced after a season's campaigning. The brigade's old flags had either been captured or damaged so badly they had to be destroyed, or like some others, were sent back to Texas for display as tributes to Confederate bravery. After Gettysburg, it was grim war, and Texans had much more to worry about than what sort of flag they would unfurl in battle. With Lee's army surrendered at Appomattox, the regiments of the Texas Brigade flew unadorned Army of Northern Virginia battle flags identical to those of the rest of the Army. However, there was one exception, and that is a battle flag Texas pattern won by presented by Mrs. Young of Houston, who was a benefactor of the Hood's Brigade, which I'll show you at the end of this talk. We'll show you that particular thing. Now, in the West, the Army of Northern Virginia now had their supply of flags, and so did Hood's Brigade, after all of the various machinations. Now, standardizing and supplying battle flags proved even more difficult in the Western armies, especially in the heartland, where the Army of Tennessee was. Outside of Northern Virginia, there were numerous rebel commands, each with their own generals, whose responsibility was to determine their styles of battle flags. The result was a dizzying and often confusing array of designs and patterns. The most important of the Western forces was the Army of Tennessee. Until late 1863, its regiments, brigades, divisions, and corps flew a variety of flags. Thus, Texans in these commands hoisted many patterns of flags, and as usual, to add the Lone Star. This is probably the earliest of the Terry's Texas Ranger flags. This was actually captured in Bowling Green, Kentucky in 1861 when Terry got killed. It's held in Chicago somewhere. We came across this slide. We begged them to find it for us. They weren't too interested. It's in one of the Chicago Industrial Museum of Science and Industry warehouses somewhere. So we know it only by this obscure slide. But it's the only example I've ever been able to find of a Bonnie blue flag. An actual Bonnie blue flag. Some of the vexillology people have discussed that fact. Were there really any Bonnie blue flags, or is that just a metaphor? I believe it's probably just a metaphor. There were, with the exception of this and maybe a few others. Again, the Secession Flag used by Ross's 6th Cavalry out of North Texas. A light silk flag with gold stars on it used by by Ross's 6th Cavalry. This is a Polk flag. General Leonidas Polk, the Episcopal Bishop of Louisiana, was also a general in the Confederate Army, and his division at first had this particular flag, which certainly has these ecclesiastical pattern, as it were. Again, a Lone Star. This is the flag of the 9th Texas Infantry Regiment, which would be part of Ector's Brigade later. This doesn't have a Lone Star, but it has a lone moon, as you can see. This is a Van Dorn flag used by Texas troops in the Army of the Confederate Northwest, which is Oklahoma and Arkansas, and the subject of my dissertation many years ago. Very interesting flag, imaginative flag, a little bitty sort of thing. This is not a Texas version. We don't have a Texas version of that, but several of the Texas cavalry regiments flew flags like this. Then we have this flag of Macau's Brigade, which looks like nothing less than the flag of Scotland. And I don't know why that is necessarily, but he's got one battle honor there. Again, the 10th Texas Cavalry would serve as part of Ector's Brigade. But of course, the most famous of the regional variants was the Hardee battle flag. General Simon Bolivar Buckner, commanding a Confederate division in Kentucky in 1862, wanted, quote, a battle flag so distinctive in character it could not be mistaken. Okay. He designed the simple blue flag, and his wife sewed and presented a copy to each of his regiments. When these units became part of the Confederate General William Hardee's Corps, the soldiers began referring to the diminutive standard as the Hardee flag. But it was General Pat Claiborne's division with which the flag was most commonly associated. Flying the blue flag, Claiborne's division became the most renowned fighting force in the West, with Granbury's Texas Brigade its most famous component. This is really one of my very favorite Confederate battle flags. It's only about 38 inches, maybe smaller. It's hard to tell because it's been stretched all around. This is in the archives. The Hardee flag, of course, is, and here's a variant of it, this Terry's Texas Ranger flag, although they weren't part of Hardee's, Claiborne's division. This clearly was simply a flag with a white ball in the middle, and it was sent to the regiment at this time, which is the flag of the 6th Infantry and 15th Dismounted Cavalry Consolidated, and someone who had a little bit of sewing expertise customized it with the red star in the middle and then with the sort of embroidered Texas around there. It's a very small flag for a battle flag. So, and Hardee flags are typically made out of very poor cloth, kind of cotton cloth, and the dyes don't hold very well. So the blue it's very good that we have some blue left in that. Some of the surviving Hardee flags from other states look pea green, in fact, because of the way the dyes have faded. This is the other one that we have, the 17th Texas Cavalry dismounted with battle honors. This one was captured outside of Atlanta, which is the reason we have. The other flag actually had been at the Battle of Franklin, had been all through the Atlanta campaign, and had survived the Battle of Bentonville and was taken home wrapped. The person the standard bearer wrapped it around his body to save it. So it had been in a lot of battles. You can see what battles exactly this one is because it tells you its own biography there. Now, while the Hardee flag served to motivate Cleburne's elite troops, for the rest of the Army of Tennessee, something akin to a national flag a national battle flag seemed called for. Now, the Army of Tennessee had a regulation battle flag, or at least the specifications for that, and it's this flag. Okay. I was always very confused as a child, back when we were having the Civil War centennial, that the Army of Northern Virginia flag was square, but every flag I saw, every Confederate flag that people flew in their yards in those days, was rectangular. And I looked in books, and it always said Confederate naval flag. And that didn't make any sense to me. So I'm glad I finally figured this out. The flags of the Army of Tennessee were, in fact, rectangular. And they were battle flags like this. Joe Johnston, who had commanded the forces that would be the Army of Tennessee and selected the original Army of Northern Virginia flag, was responsible for this one. Usually rectangular, some sort of tending towards square. We don't have any good Texas examples of this, although we do have this 3rd Texas Cavalry with all its battle honors, a glorious, glorious flag that turns up in many reunion pictures that we have. Now, Army of Tennessee had trouble finding flags just like everyone else. If I had more time, I could tell you the details on this. They had some professionally made flags. To fulfill Johnston's orders to get this pattern flag so they'd be ready for the Atlanta campaign, they went to all sorts of different sources. Ector's Brigade, which of course was a brigade of Texans serving with the Army of Tennessee, did not have any flags. They had all worn out. So they sent their commander, William Young. He collected money from the troops. He went to Richmond and he bought 4 Army of Northern Virginia pattern bunting flags. And this is the one that survives. This is old Charlie Matthews. He's the standard bearer. This was taken in 1910, and this is the flag. And you can still see this flag today. It's in Ray Ritchie owns it up in the Fort Worth, Texas Civil War Museum. So I would urge you to go look at that sometime. It's very interesting. Now, in the Trans-Mississippi, things were even worse and even more unpredictable. They had some of the most eccentric looking designs out there and materials of all sorts. Most of them were extremely rustic and odd. This is the first flag of the 11th Texas, and it's sort of based on a nightmare version of the stars and bars. It's got 4 different colors. You can't see this. There's another bar down here, and you can see the Lone Star in the middle. And one side is made by the ladies of Sherman, and the other side by the ladies of Denison, where these were raised. One group of ladies couldn't count, so they had to add the other star later, and I'm not sure which town it was. Each of the ladies I've met from Denison and Sherman have an idea who it is, but it's never the same idea. Then there's the flag of Wood's Regiment, which I think was one of those Galveston regiments, the 33rd Texas Cavalry or something that was at Galveston one of those times. Sort of a blow-up version, a Lone Star version of a battle flag. Then you have this very interesting one that was taken at Fort Sims in Corpus Christi by Union troops in 1863, and it's like somebody was given a flag kit for a battle flag Texas pattern, and they didn't know where the stars went, apparently. But so otherwise, in every other way, it's just the same as one of these other battle flags. Now, battle flags were hard in the West to replace. There were so few of them sometimes that they were hard to replace, and they were hard, and so they ended up having to repair a lot of them. This one you can't see from this slide, but there's a white piece that was taken off the end there to repair, and then you have all of these different representations of Lone Stars on this thing. This is Gould's battalion, the leader of which became the first dean of the University of Texas Law School later on. But again, a very rustic-looking flag. This is made out of sort of sackcloth, basically. Now, beautiful silk flag. This would have been blue at one time. Notice the colors reversed. 3rd Texas Infantry Regiment. 3rd Texas Infantry Regiment was raised in Corpus Christi. Very interesting regiment. It was 1/3 Anglo, 1/3 Hispanic, and 1/3 German. They had to translate commands between the different groups. There was a polylingual organization, but they never had a battle flag. And they served since 1861. They saw action in one battle, Jenkins Ferry, late in the war, but they were in Galveston a large part of the time. In 1863, they got this beautiful large silk battle flag, and it came from Cuba. That's why it was so interesting. I mean, it's such a fancy silk flag. It's very large with silver braiding on it. It was ship through the blockade. There was a group of Americans of Southerners who had been in New Orleans when it was captured, who moved to Cuba, and to make money, they constructed silk battle flags and sent them through the blockade. Here's another one. We don't know what unit it is, but we know it was at the Battle of Pleasant Hill and the Battle of Mansfield. This is another very beautiful one. Notice how color fast it is and how it has survived in the size. But again, there was a third flag that I found records of, which was meant for Terry's Texas Rangers, which had ended up on a blockade running ship when Galveston surrendered, and we don't know what happened to it, but it was another large, beautiful silk flag. Now, lastly, with just the little bit of time I have left for this, this is the battle flag Texas pattern. Now, I've run across this reference in several different contexts, and there are examples of this particular pattern of Confederate Texas flag in all three major theaters. And it's always referred to as a battle flag, or Texas pattern battle flag, or battle flag Texas pattern. This is Debray's regiment in Texas. Now, the characteristic of the battle flag Texas pattern is it's a rectangular, it's sometimes almost square, Army of Northern Virginia, Southern Cross style, without any fringe, without any borders, without fimbriations, which are these little white borders here, with 13 stars and a large lone star in the center. This is one of the most pure versions I've found. This is a version we have in the state archives of the flag, and there's a very good chance this is a flag that was flown for a short time by Terry's Texas Rangers, although I don't have absolute confirmation of that. And last, a picture of Mrs. Young's flag. Again, this is one of our real treasures. This is a battle flag Texas pattern. It was constructed in Houston, and it was sent to the 5th Texas in 1863. This is the flag that appears in McCardle's picture of Lee leading the Lee to the rear episode, and this is the flag that was used with when Lee is convinced by his troops not to lead them into battle in the wilderness and to risk their lives. So flags are hard to come by. Flags are precious for many reasons, and sometimes units didn't have them, and they had to be replaced. So there were lots of them that were needed, and that's why there were so many with the Confederacy. So thank you very much.
Maberry. We can take some questions now. If you please wait for a microphone, but we're ready for questions.
Did that lone star come from the 2-star flag that was Texas prior flag?
Oh, when you say the 2-star flag, are you talking about the Alamo flag?
The one that flew the Alamo, the Texas Hidalgo flag?
No.
It was?
No.
It wasn't 2 that went to 1 to make the lone star?
I'm not sure exactly what your question is. Explain again, the Hidalgo flag?
There was a Spanish flag, perhaps the one that, a Mexican flag that flew over the Alamo.
Of the Alamo, yes.
So there's 2 stars.
Okay, yes, one was for Texas and one was Coahuila. Yes, one over the other. No, actually the symbolism from the Lone Star is very old in American history. It comes from the idea of one star representing one state. The characteristic of the 1777 flag law, where each star would represent a state in the Union, in the constellation of the American flag. When in 1810, when the West Florida Republic, which is where Baton Rouge is today, was announced, it was taken from the Spanish by frontiersmen, they hoisted a flag that had a single lone star on it to represent a star in the constellation of the American flag. So whenever you have a lone star, that means that the symbolism is that it is a star for the flag of the United States. Now the Texian, what we call the Texian flag, which is our Lone Star flag today, the Lone Star was one taken from the constellation, but it also took a stripe and 2 stripes from the flag of the United States also. So the symbolism is of the constellation of the U.S. flag originally.
Prior to joining Union, there wasn't such a flag?
No, they used it, but I argue that the intent of Texas was always to be part of the Union during the Revolution. And in fact, the Lone Star and Stripes flag that was used during the Texas Revolution, that is what you think of as the naval flag of the Revolution, it has 13 stripes and 1 star for Texas. But the intention was always to add that star to the Union of the United States.
I just have a comment about your 6th and 15th flag.
Mm-hmm.
After the Battle of Atlanta, Claiborne's division, especially Granbury, a.k.a. James A. Smith's brigade,
Mm-hmm.
lost several of their flags on July 22nd,
Mm-hmm.
Especially that of the 17th, 18th, 24th, 25th, lost theirs to the Michigan Cavalry and
Right.
Michigan Infantry. It's my understanding that at Palmetto, Georgia, several of those flags that had been lost were replaced with the flag that you just shown. So it's practically a new flag as they went through Alabama up to Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
And just as a comment, I have seen an account where the ensign of the 7th Texas was also carrying a flag of that style with a star on it.
So which flag are you speaking of?
I'm speaking of the
Secession-looking flag?
no. I'm talking about Granbury's 6th and 15th
Okay,
flag,
okay,
the Hardy style flag.
okay, I see.
But the applique, I guess I'm leading up to that. I'm going to assume, unless there's other research, there's a good chance that those flags that were replaced at Palmetto, Georgia, had the red stars on them.
I've never heard that. I've never come across any explanations. I've been through all the sources of Granbury's brigade, and it's never mentioned like that. But I would be happy to.
Yeah, there's only one other account that I've read, and it
Yeah.
said Ira B. Sadler, the ensign of the 7th Texas Infantry, was shot while carrying a flag at Franklin,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a star. I didn't say it was red. There was a star on his Hardy
Right.
flag.
Interesting. I suspect, I think probably more of the Texas regiments had this particular flag also. At least, maybe not a red star, but some sort of star, certainly.
I was hoping maybe someday another flag will surface to
Yeah.
corroborate that whole idea that the flags that had been worn out or captured in the Atlanta campaign had been replaced with the same style flag of the 6th and 15th.
Yeah, it's my understanding that this flag predates the Atlanta campaign, the red star. Okay.
Last question, please, Jeff.
Yes, the Walls Texas Legion, I assume this was after Vicksburg, had a
Yes.
stainless banner with Vicksburg written
Right, the
along
second national pattern.
That was what did they do? That was presumably after Vicksburg. Did they have one before Vicksburg?
I don't know what they had before. I have not found that out. I know this flag was when they served in Galveston afterwards, is when they had that second pattern flag. And the significance of it's one of the best versions of a second national flag that we have. But no, I've never come across, and in fact, I've been asked this question before. I've never been able to locate exactly what a Walls Division flag is.
And some of the Bonnie Blue versions have the white flag, white star. Some of them have the gold star. Any
Well,
difference in that?
again, we haven't come across many actual Bonnie Blue flags. We hear references to them all the time. We hear, for instance, at the Battle of Stones River or Murfreesboro, that the 10th Texas was led by a Bonnie Blue flag. But the 10th Texas Bonnie Blue flag turns out to be that Macau battle flag. It's just a blue flag. It doesn't have the star on it. And of course, the song talks about the single star of secession. Taking your star out of the constellation of the American flag and putting it in a new constellation. This is the intermediate step, is the single star. But we've never found an actual surviving version. And that may be the problem. And in fact, the secession flag of Texas has a single star, but it also has the other stars around it too. Yeah. So I think the Bonnie Blue flag is much a metaphor as anything, because in the OR I've found times when the Bonnie Blue flag, when a regular Confederate flag is referred to as a Bonnie Blue flag, even though it was red. So who knows? Yeah.
We've run out of time. Please help me thank Dr. Maberry.